Hey everybody, it's Trina from the Alluring Bead Boutique and the Bead Mat. Hope you guys are having a great day. I'm going to do a quick little video on a couple of tools that I have gotten a little less recently, but I'm finally starting to use them for some of my new metal smithing techniques that I'm learning. And in a recent video, I showed you guys how I made a little dome shape out of a disc. And I thought, well, let me go ahead and introduce you guys to these disc cutters. So the first one here I got is the first one that I got. And when you get a disc cutter, you get these little pieces here, these little cutters or punches. And you get this little block that has a slit in it here along three sides where you can slide your sheet metal into it. And these are nice and clearly marked in inches what the diameter of each little circle punch would come out to be. So, for example, on the little kitty cat earrings here, I used the biggest one. And these are a little bit larger now because I hammered them. But when I first made them, I made them using that 5/8 inch. And let me just set these punches down. Then I realized, immediately when I got this that I had really wanted one that had a much bigger diameter to it. So I had to wait a little bit till I got some more money gathered up. And I went over to Michael's and I got this one using a 50% off coupon. And this one has the much larger holes, which is the 1 inch size, the 1/2 inch size. Then we got a 7/8 inch here and a 3/4 inch here, and then the smallest, well, not necessarily the smallest, but the 5/8 inch and this 1/2 inch, the smallest two, correspond with these two on this particular other punch set over here. But to use this particular, either one of these disc cutters, and they have all kinds, folks. They have much, much more expensive ones out there. And there's many ways that you can use these things as well. Like, I've watched a few of my Craftsy classes where they actually take this and the corresponding, cutter, and they use a hydraulic press to actually punch through as opposed to hammering it through. But for right now, all I have is my brass hammer. And you do need to have a brass mallet of at least 1 pound in order to use these, because you need something really heavy to strike your punch with here, but you don't want to use your good jewelry hammers because you can see here how it affects this brass. You really have to hit hard. And one other thing you do need to use these with is some cut lube. It actually makes it go a lot smoother. The very first ones I tried, I showed you guys that little brass, domed brass piece in the last video. And the reason that has never been made into anything is because when I first started trying to punch it out, my hammer was bouncing all over the place and was bouncing all over the little punch, die punch, and it made little circular marks all over my little piece of metal. But I have since learned how to work this thing so that that does not happen. I'm not going to show you guys exactly how to use it today. I talked about in the last video how I had cut out this little piece. And you can see here that I did a really good job. There are none of those little circular marks on my little circle. So it looks really good. There's just, a little bit of light scratching that occurs when you buy sheet metal. These are not from the punch. You would be able to tell they would be really deep and ridgy looking. But then, after I punched that particular little disc out, I moved my piece over into a larger hole, and I figured out how to punch out washers as well. And so you can see that on this one, I don't have those little ridge lines as well, so it looks pretty good and would not require an excessive amount of finishing if you were to use this in a piece of jewelry. Okay. Now here's just a piece of 24 gauge sheet that I got in that little pack that I was telling you guys about in a couple of videos that I got at Michael's. And this sheet actually has some kind of weird coating on it. I have found out over trying to solder it. It is not good. It is good for cold connection jewelry, but it is not good for solder jewelry. So keep that in mind when you get ready. If you want to solder metal, you will need to make sure that you get your sheet metal so it doesn't have any kind of coating on it, or you can fume yourself and run into all kinds of problems. But let me just show you how this actually works out. So here's my little disc cutter, and here's a piece of metal. And I actually was practicing drawing circles on this piece with a protractor. So just don't worry about that. Anyhow, so all you do is you take your metal and you would slide it in. Say I wanted to punch a 5/8 inch disc out. I would go ahead and slide my metal into place like that. Let me move my other ones out of the way. Then I need to get my 5/8 inch punch, which is this one right here. But before I put it into my actual disc cutter, you would get your cut lube, and you would take the sharp edge of your punch die here, and you would get some cut lube all around that outside edge. Just roll it around in your cut lube like that, and then place it down into the corresponding hole on the disc cutter. And like I said, I'm not really going to hammer it here, but I will show you this much, how to prevent it from jumping around so much. When you get ready to hammer it, you want to make sure that you hold this die into place very firmly, but you want your fingers down out of the way. Then you're going to take your big brass hammer, which this is a 1-pound hammer, and it actually came with my disc cutter that I ordered all this off of Amazon. I'll throw some links up down in the description box. Anyways, you would just start striking this really firmly, but using your die punch to hold that metal into place. And that is how you keep it from creating those extra ridges around the outside edge and getting deep scratches into your little metal piece. But I don't want to get into hammering right now. First of all, I'm not set up for it. You can see my camera's right here. And I don't have room to strike it, so we will just hold off for another time on that. But that is how you use it. And once you strike it through, your little cut disc will come flopping out of the back. And if your little die gets kind of wedged up in there, which they tend to do, I just take this, take it over to the edge of my desk where it's actually just flowing out to the floor. And I tap the top of it with the hammer just a few times, and it will push the die all the way through. Now, there are lots of things that can go wrong when you're doing these things, but if you don't have a big enough piece of metal, for example, slid in here, you can warp the edges of the little piece of sheet, and it can get hung up in there. And then you'll have to fidget and use pliers and do whatever kind of fidgeting you have to do to pull it out. I've done that several times already, but it's just one of those things. They make some really nicer, very expensive disc cutters that have these handles that just rotate around and cut the disc out that way and everything, but they're in the hundreds of dollars range, folks, and that is a little above my pay grade. But anyhow, so I finally got my second one with the larger holes, and it works exactly the same way as the smaller one. And they're pretty cool. And it saves a lot. Like if you're going to be doing discs and circles, it saves a lot of time of you having to use your jeweler saw and your bench pen to cut out these little discs and washers. And this really makes a perfect circle. So you see what I'm saying? You would have a hard time getting something that small done with your jeweler saw and have it come out so neat. So I recommend that if you want to do anything with that type, if you don't want to buy your little blanks already pre-cut, then you could get a disc cutter. So I'm going to be working on another ring like I talked about in my last video, another little ball ring, and I'm going to be using bronze for it. And I cut this little disc out. I showed it to you in the last video. And now I need to dome it into a little cup so that it cups around my stone. So that for this technique, you use a dapping block. And here's another mistake that I made. when I first wanted to get a dapping block, I did not read the description carefully, and so what I wound up with is this little set here. But the block here, I'm going to get a ruler out and show you guys. Like, I was thinking that I was getting this, you know, big, maybe 3 by 3 inch dapping block. And actually what I've wound up with here is this little block that is 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch. And so my largest dome here is this one. So I cannot make a dome any bigger, you know, than that outside circumference of that circle right there. Which in this case, I'm not going to get up my really fancy measurer. I'll just use this here. This one, I couldn't make one any bigger than about 15 millimeters. So that's the one drawback. But it works out well for these little tiny cups. And so what you have to do is you have to find one of your little cup holes here, one of your little indents in which your little piece of your little disc fits in there perfectly, just like that. And then you take these little rounded off daps, and you would start hammering this with your brass mallet. Let me show you how it sits in there. Like, put your metal in. And then you would take this and put it like that. And then you start striking it with your brass hammer. And that's how you create the dome. So I'm going to go off camera for just a minute. And I'm going to go ahead and start doming this for you. So I started my dapping with this the number 8 dap. And this is how far I've got my little dome shape to look so far. So once I've dapped with that one, then I would start moving down in size. Each one of these has a corresponding number, and they go down in size like that. And you would just keep hammering on that on your little disc, using the next size down, until your little cup shape forms and you get it to where you want it. Once you've gotten it so far into this little hole, then you can move it. Once it's smaller, it'll fit into the next one, like that. And you just continue on. So this is where I started. Then I would go into the next smaller, like so. And you just keep having to play around with these holes until you find the right ones. This block is not marked, so it's basically a trial and error that you have to figure it out on your own where you're going next. And you just keep going down smaller and smaller until you get your little cup shape formed. And I'll show you in just a minute what I'm talking about. Let me zoom out just a little here. So now I've gotten my little cup shape made pretty well. So I've gotten my little half-drilled stone bead out, and I'm checking it up against the bead, like that. This is a half-drilled stone, like I said at the beginning. And so I'm just going to line that up just like that. And you can see that it fits really nicely up against the bead. But I don't want it to be something that's ostentatious and come out too far around the outside edge of this pretty little stone. I just want something to solder my little peg post into, and then solder this to the ring band. So really quickly, I wanted to, since we talked about cold connections using jump rings and punching holes in pieces of sheet metal, like I showed you in the last video for some of the earrings, I want to show you really quickly this cute little hole punch. And I'm not going to go into the specifics of what size these holes are because I can't remember, just to be quite honest with you. I have it somewhere written down, but I'm not going to drag it out now. But this is what the little... This is very inexpensive little two different size hole punch. And what you can... Basically, the way it works is you just unscrew this. You slide your little piece of metal down in here. You position it where you want it to, usually by marking it the place that you want your hole with a Sharpie. Then you'll have to line up the Sharpie mark with this little screw as it comes down like so. So you have to peek in here and line it up with your little Sharpie mark. And then you just keep going, screwing this down, and it punches a hole right through the metal. And this one is the larger size over here. know if you can get a good look at the diameter of that little screw right there, but that's the size of the hole that it makes. And then on this end, there's a little bit skinnier one, and it works exactly the same way. Yeah, and like I said, I've got this written down somewhere, but I don't know it off the top of my head. But that's how I've been punching holes so far with my metal jewelry that I've been working on. But you can also drill a hole using, you know, your either a drill, a Dremel tool, or a flex shaft with a drill bit in it. And these little center punches here help you to find this, to use a drill bit. So say, for example, I had that little circle cut out and I wanted to cut a hole right in the middle of it using a drill. The first thing I would do is take this center punch and I would put it on the exact center of that little dot. And then I would just strike it with my hammer, nice and firm. And it would make a little indentation there and a place for my drill bit to catch first. In other words, so that when you go to drill with a drill bit, your drill bit doesn't flop all over this flat metal. It has a nice little place to catch. And you can drill right through it just like that using a drill bit. And one last thing I wanted to talk to you guys about as far as working with some of your different types of metals. So, so far I've been working with copper, brass, bronze, a little bit of sterling, and some gold fill. And so basically, when you're working with sterling or gold fill, that stuff is really expensive. And Rio Grande is one place that I know of and I could talk about right off the top of my head. And I'm sure there are others out there that do this same type of thing. But what I do is I keep these little baggies. Like, for example, this one's marked gold fill scraps. And any scraps of my gold fill metal, I throw into this little baggie. Any scraps of sterling, I put into this one. Because these you can send off and get money for. And I just, like I said, I haven't worked very much with my precious metals yet, so I don't have a lot of scrap. But anyhow, I've got what little bit I do have saved away in these baggies. And I keep that put up. And when I'm working with silver or gold fill, I drag them out and keep them handy. And if I'm working with copper or brass or bronze, I go ahead and throw my scraps into these little bags. Now, these, basically, you are not going to be able to recycle for money, but guess what? Look at all those huge pieces in there. And there's lots of cool little shapes and a lot of different things that, you know, I'm learning as I go along with this metal. So basically, I'm just holding on to all of this because I don't know if there's maybe a way later on I can figure out how to melt it, how to reshape it into something else. But there's also a lot of workable pieces of metal in this little bag. And then over here, you know, I have my copper. And you'll want to make sure that you untwist anything that's going to poke holes in your bag, like obviously I did not do with this particular piece of metal right here. Is already poking holes into this bag. But you can bend it. Either if you can't bend it with your fingers or a pair of pliers, you can just take your bench block and a nylon mallet, and you can straighten that out to where it doesn't poke holes into your bag. Oops. Earthquake over there. And then just keep all your scraps for utilizing in other projects and things like that. Because it really gets expensive, folks, when you start working with metal. And I'm a firm believer in waste not, want not. So that's pretty much it for this video on some of our metal forming tools that you may want to get and have available to yourself for cutting discs and shaping domes. There's tons and tons more of, you know, metal forming tools out there, of which, you know, all of your different types of pliers and cutters and things, those are also considered metal forming tools. Your hammers, your bench blocks, your anvils and things, mandrels and all that stuff. Now, I'm not going to really do a big, huge video on all the different pliers and things like that, because I have written up a PDF, of the basic tools. I went into a little bit more detail on some of the tools, and these are just the tools that I have already gotten for myself. am not delving into ones that I don't have, because obviously I can't explain to you how to use something that I don't even have. But, you know, I've got lots of different little mandrels, things like that. But in the PDF, I talk about a lot of these different tools, but then I also break it down for you on what you're going to need for your most basic needs to get started. If working with metal is something that you're really interested in getting started doing, which it is for me. And so that's where we are, folks. All right. So, folks, that's about it for this little quick introduction to, like, the disc cutter and the dapping block, etc. Got my little pieces, parts laid out here to work on my little ball ring. I also happen to have a few little extra things, like this is a washer I cut out using my disc cutter when I cut out this little disc. And then I just cut those little tiny square off of my piece of sheet, and I cut around that extra circle there, which you can see that came out of right there. And I haven't done anything to the edges of this yet, but it makes this cute little octagon shape, and I'm just going to polish up some of these rough edges and throw this into my little components bag for stuff to play around with later. But that's it for now. I just wanted to do this quick little demonstration video and show you guys about the disc cutter and the dapping block and some of the metal forming tools that I am using here as of late. And let you guys know that there are links in the description box below that are to my affiliate links on Amazon. If you're going to pick up any of this stuff, you can use my links, and that will help me out a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and get off of this video so I can move on to a soldering tutorial for my little ring right here that we're going to be working on. So that's it. You guys head on over to the Bead mat, subscribe to my newsletter. Make sure if you like this video, click like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll get back to you guys really soon. Thank you so much for watching.